How should we learn about other people and the world? Should we start with observation and then reach conclusions? Or should we start with a belief and then test the belief through observation? Are there any biases that are introduced into these processes? Sir Francis Bacon had definite opinions on these very basic questions. Sir Francis Bacon, now on the philosophical roots of psychology. In the 13th century, St. Thomas Aquinas integrated Aristotelian thought into Christian theology. As a result, reason and the observation of nature were both elevated in importance. Beginning in the 15th century, the Renaissance emerges. The Renaissance can be characterized by a renewal of the open-minded inquiry initiated much earlier by the ancient Greeks. Also, the Renaissance was characterized by a shift from a God-centered to a human-centered worldview. The Renaissance also reflected an expanded interest in human self-discovery and a curious interest in the natural world. Before the Renaissance, challenges to church authority were dangerous. But the critical spirit of the Renaissance began to challenge the fixed truths of church dogma. Questioning of the church escalated. The church responded with censorship and repression. This period could be characterized as a transition between theology and science. This awakening of secular reason and observation of nature occurred for a number of reasons. First, Europeans were beginning to explore Asia, China, and the Western Hemisphere. Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo were making new discoveries in astronomy. Also, Martin Luther challenged the centralized authority of the church. Finally, the invention of movable print facilitated the rapid expansion of new ideas. All of these factors contributed to the opening of Europe to new ideas. This threatened the power of the church. Sir Francis Bacon was an important figure to this movement toward the development of science and secularization. Francis Bacon was a man of the Renaissance. He was born in London in 1561 of an important political family. He was elected to Parliament, but was then impeached for accepting bribes. He ended up in prison for 4 days. He was then forced to retire from political life. This allowed him to focus on science and philosophy. Some speculate that Bacon was the real author of Shakespearean plays. Why is Francis Bacon important to the development of science and psychology? Bacon was a strong advocate of what we now call radical empiricism. Radical empiricism proposes that the best way to learn about the world, including people, is through direct and objective observations. It is through many observations that generalization can then carefully be made. This is called the inductive approach. Induction was advocated 400 years later by the behavioral psychologists, especially John Watson and B.F. Skinner. Also, induction is often used in psychology to develop psychological measures. Bacon believed that scientists should be very careful about making premature generalizations. Bacon strongly distrusted the deductive approach to science. Deduction starts with a theory. A logically derived hypothesis is then identified, and data is collected to test the hypothesis. Bacon believed that 4 types of biases can enter into this deductive approach. One type of bias can be personal in nature. For example, the sexism of a researcher may motivate he or she to conduct research that supports an inferiority of women. Biases can also be cultural and unconscious in nature. For example, Euro-American assumptions about intelligence may result in measures that focus on logical and analytical abilities rather than social or creative intelligence. Biases can also result from the associations of certain words. For example, shyness is viewed somewhat negatively, while sociability and outgoingness are viewed positively. Finally, biases can enter into perceptions of the world due to inherent human tendencies. For example, Historically, humans have had a strong tendency to anthropomorphize nature. That is, to attribute human characteristics to animals and natural objects. According to Bacon, these biases can have harmful effects on the deductive process. Also, Bacon can be considered a father of positivistic science. Positivism proposes that science should only study directly observable phenomena. This approach to science is reflected in classical behaviorism. Positivism also proposes that science can and should serve the needs of society. This view of science is still with us today, especially within psychology. Finally, Bacon can be considered the skeptic's skeptic. He was skeptical of all sources of knowledge, except direct observation. This skepticism followed the ancient Greek critical tradition of Thales and Pyrrho of Elis. Due to the influence of the church, this skepticism was still dangerous in the 16th century. This skeptical attitude continues today as a component of the modern scientific attitude.